very much for joining us this morning. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the senior partner here at Freeths. I'm delighted to welcome you. It's a very dank, wet, horrible morning here near Milton Keynes. So I'm delighted to have Sarah Boden with us, who's really going to brighten our day. She's from Imagine Theatre, and she's got an amazing story to tell us because she's had a devastating year, but I won't steal her thunder on that. Sarah is co-founder of Imagine Theatre, and as I say, she's had a bit of a roller coaster year. So I'm going to hand over to her in a minute. But before I do that, I would just like to say that we are recording this webinar. We will be taking questions from you. We'd love to have your questions, and I'm sure there's lots of things you'll want to ask Sarah. So please do use the question and answer section on the Zoom, and I'll be able to pick those up, and then I will ask those questions of Sarah. But before we set off, I just wanted to say to you all that it may be the only opportunity we have now to wish you a happy Christmas before the big event. Panto season is here on us at the moment, not quite in the normal way. And as Sarah and Imagine Theatre are the kings and queens of pantomimes, then I think she's going to inspire us with a little bit of pantomime as in effect, as well as her story. So over to you, Sarah.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Philippa, and lovely to see you all. Thank you all for coming. So a bit of an introduction as to who I am. My name is Sarah. I live in Coventry, and as Philippa rightly said, I work for Imagine Theatre as one of the co-founders and co-directors of the company. We are the second biggest pantomime producers in the world, and this Christmas we were due to produce 17 pantomimes across the whole of the country. That took us from as far north as Inverness in northern Scotland, across down to South Wales, across into the East Coast, down to the South Coast, and several other productions across Scotland and the North and Midlands in England. But obviously that isn't happening this year because of the pandemic. But what I thought I'd do is take you through our year, starting at this time last year, with just what it was like to be a pantomime producer at Christmas 2019 and how everything changed for us in March. So this time last year, Imagine Theatre was producing pantomimes all over the UK. We opened our shows and the curtain went up more than 750 times on one of our shows over Christmas in 2019. We sold more than £7 million worth of tickets, playing to more than 400,000 members of audience, and the company itself grossed more than £4 million in turnover. And on the 31st of January 2020, we held our Christmas party, which everybody thinks is really weird. Why are you having a Christmas party in January? And the answer is you just don't have time to do it in December. So we have it either in November or January. And this year the decision was January. And sitting around the Christmas party table, there were 22 of us, 22 members of staff at head office. But little did we know what was actually going to be ahead of us. So December was a huge success last year. We had productions, we had award-winning productions across the country. I travelled more than 4,500 miles seeing productions of our own and of other producers, and everything was great. Business was booming, and what we had lined up for Christmas of 2020 was huge and really, really exciting. We started work on the 2020 pantomime season on the 1st of February, which is we always work until the 31st of January on the previous year, putting everything away and tidying, and then you start on the 1st of February with the productions for the following year. So on the 1st of February, everything was great. Everything was carrying on. The team started working on the shows. We started all our pre-production planning. And then on the 16th of March, Boris Johnson told us not to go to the theatre anymore. And that was the start of everything. The 16th of March was a funny old day. We just thought it would take a few weeks and we'd be back at work by the middle of May, and that we'd just have a little bit of a pause and that we would be all sorted. But then on the 22nd of March, as we all know, he locked the whole country down. And I don't think it really came as a surprise to any of us, but the theatre industry was beginning to think this is just going to be a little bit more than maybe we realise. And by the middle of April, our team had gone on furlough, and it was left with just myself and my husband to run our company. I haven't done some of the jobs that I ended up doing for 15 years. I haven't, done the administration on children's licensing, and I haven't run their finance accounts, and I haven't, things that I hadn't done for years, I was finding myself doing. And it was just a bit of a challenge really for us all, as it was for us all. But the way that our business works is that we are very cyclical, and our income and our turnover is very, very cyclical. So we spend the whole year working on projects, and then all of those projects come to fruition in a 3 to 4 week period through December and early January. So the money that we earn the previous year pays for us to work right the way up until December, and then we earn the money that we're going to earn. But in April, we started to realise that it probably wasn't going to be happening. And by the middle of May, it was very, very evident to us that Panto season, as we knew it, was not going to be able to happen. So a business that earns £4 million between the 1st of December and the 3rd of January wasn't going to be able to earn a penny for the entire year, because our entire product was going to be lost for the year. It takes quite a long time to postpone a pantomime, and people say, oh, how come it's taken so long? Well, by the time you have to plan for the following year's production, you have to move all the bookings that you've got. And so the first decisions were made in May to postpone shows, but we didn't actually get to postpone them until July. But by that point, the theatre industry was on its knees. We knew we weren't going to be able to open with social distancing in an auditorium. We knew that we weren't going to be able to make things financially viable. And we were looking at, the entire industry was looking at a year with no income at all. And that was pretty catastrophic for the theatre industry in general. So that takes us kind of to the middle of the year. We've got, at this point in time, I've got 18 members of staff on furlough. A couple of them have had to leave us to go to other projects because they were short-term members of staff. But we've got 18 members of staff on furlough. But like every other business across the whole country, we've also got our overheads to pay. And our overheads of rent and heat and light, broadband, telephones, and council tax, anything and everything that we would normally have to pay, and it wasn't going away. Part of the problem we faced was that we run a huge store, so we're not just a team of people producing pantomimes, but we have a massive industrial unit filled with scenery and costumes and props, and we were over £51,000 in value for rateable value, which meant we didn't qualify for any of the council grants, and we didn't qualify for the council tax holiday. So at this point in time, the only support we had was furlough. And as a business, our overheads, excluding salary, are more than £450,000 a year, and we had absolutely no way of paying that. I mean, we're very lucky that a theatre business like us has to run cash rich. So we have the cash to pay, but it was the long-term cash flow that was going to be our challenge. We managed to speak at length with Warwick District Council and eventually got them to understand the different segments of our business, and that some of our business is retail because we do hire. And so through the retail section of our business, we eventually, in the middle of July, were able to qualify for the council tax holiday, but that was quite a stress in getting that. And then eventually we were able to get a small grant to help us. But other than that, at that point in time, we didn't have any finances to help us. Then in July, they announced the £1.5 billion cultural recovery grant. And that was announced in July. We then got the application forms in April, but we finally found out in October that we were going to get some help. But up until October, we didn't think we were going to get any financial help. So it was quite a challenge financially as well. So Philippa, I don't know if you've got any questions you want to throw in at this stage, and then I can take you through the next stages of what we're doing.
Yes, of course. I was going to ask you about, just before all this happened, back in October, you were nominated for Businesswoman of the Year. For that to have happened, and then to have the high of that, and then what you've had to come through, what would you say in terms of the lessons that you've learned from that period, because you've had to do so many other things that you weren't necessarily doing before in your role. Now you've had to be multifaceted.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Philippa and I first encountered each other in September of last year, as Philippa rightly said, for the Businesswoman of the Year Awards, which I was very kindly nominated to be one of the finalists, which was a huge experience, one that I really, really enjoyed, and I learned so much from, because our industry is so unique. Theatre is such a unique industry, but to learn from other women that we were doing well and that we were doing things right and that our business was one that had been recognised as being successful was a huge accolade. And to know, and we were absolutely riding on the crest of a hugely successful last year in December pantomime season, plus being nominated for an award. It was huge, and we were on such a high. Nothing could have prepared any of us across the country, I don't think, for the crash that came in March. But for the theatre world, our entire rug was pulled from underneath us, because there was nothing we could do. We couldn't open, we couldn't do anything. We could work from home, and I'm a production company, so I'm able to work from home and working on productions. But anybody who worked in a theatre had their entire job just pulled away from them in a split second. And it took the government a few weeks to announce furlough. It wasn't announced immediately. So for the entire industry initially, we had no idea whether there was any kind of financial help coming at all. It took a good 2 or 3 weeks from the 16th of March, from the announcement of the closure of theatres, up until the announcement of furlough. And the stress for those people working in the industry was just enormous. Also, the biggest challenge that's faced our industry in terms of highs and lows is that the majority of people working in the theatre industry are freelancers, and most of them have fallen through the gap and haven't had any financial help. So we are finding in our industry a huge skills crisis, because so many people have left the industry and gone and found alternative employment. So it's a particularly challenging industry for women with families to work in anyway. So women who had children and childcare to worry about have found themselves having to go elsewhere. And there's a huge, huge challenge facing us for that.
And in terms of what you're doing now, in terms of you've got some online events that you've been developing, and the most exciting one for those, from my point of view, because I love pantomime, is Jack and the Beanstalk that's coming up. So have you had to learn some new skills around all of that? Because you've obviously had this period where you've been trying to fight for money to keep things alive, but then you've now got to put some creative energy into play as well. So it must be really challenging to do that, Sarah.
It is. Well, when it became obvious that we weren't going to be able to run pantomime as we know it in theatres, there are some pantomimes running live in theatres, but they're running with socially distanced audiences. Our productions were not able to run because the majority of our theatres we work with are in tier 3, so they can't reopen. But financially as well, panto needs full auditoriums to break even. It does 2 shows a day, and it needs between 70 and 80% audiences just to break even. So it was never physically going to be possible. So we started to rack our brains very early on, kind of May time, what our alternative options were. What could we do instead of a traditional pantomime? We looked at radio panto, online panto, drive-in panto. We looked at all sorts of live streaming. We looked at all sorts of different options. We weighed up all the pros and cons, did SWOT analyses on all the different options that we had, and eventually plumped that by far the best option and the easiest to reach was online production. There is a real challenge with digital deprivation, that there's a lot of the country who don't have high-speed broadband, they don't have access to computers or iPads, or they need the equipment they've got for schooling or for work. So there's a huge challenge around digital deprivation that is going on, particularly in inner city. So there was never going to be a perfect solution, because you were never going to be able to reach everybody with the solution that you were trying to find. But online came across as being the best option. We looked at all sorts of options for online panto. We looked at performing a pantomime live and streaming it live, as well as pre-recording the production. But the danger with streaming it live is if somebody gets pinged on their phone and they have to go into isolation, or somebody becomes ill, there's a risk it won't run, and you've got this huge upfront investment and no guarantee of return at the end of it, and then that's too much of a risk to take in the current situation, which is why we decided to plump for a pre-recorded online production. So once we decided on plumping for that, there was all sorts of logistics that we needed to understand, like filming. How do you socially distance people? Forming bubbles. How do you bring children in? What's your risk assessments? Where do you film it? How do you get a pantomime set that's small enough to fit into a TV studio because they're too big? All these kinds of challenges that we had to face. Plus also, the biggest challenge of all has actually been the streaming platform, because you've got YouTube and lots of streaming platforms like Vimeo, YouTube and that, but you aren't able to monetize through them. So we were looking for a streaming platform that you could monetize. And there are a few, but they're not yet ready. It's almost like the pandemic has forced the hand of theatre before the technology behind it is ready. So we've managed to find a platform which, and to explain as well, the reason it's so complicated is because each theatre tends to work with a different box office system. There's not one generic box office system that fits all. There's probably about 15 different systems out there, and each one runs on a different set of software, and each one has a different interface and the way that it works with its database. So there isn't a solution to suit all the platforms. But eventually we found a solution which works, and so we've managed to roll out an online production. It's called Jack and the Beanstalk, and it's available to purchase through the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry. And the reason that we've gone with the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry, in fact, they've headed up the project mainly, is because of the City of Culture for 2020. And the pantomime at the Coventry this year was going to be the launch of the City of Culture 2020. I don't know if you know, but of course, City of Culture has had to be delayed. So it actually commences now in May 2020 and runs until May 2021. So they've delayed it by 4 months to give the pandemic chance. But the City of Culture and the Belgrade Theatre wanted to have a big celebration of Coventry as City of Culture, which is why the Belgrade are the platform and have been the people who have produced and run the show. And it's been a challenge. It was filmed for 3 weeks over October. So they rehearsed for 2 weeks and then went into filming for 1 week, and the cast lived together as a bubble for 3 weeks to be able to do it. So that was a bit of a challenge as well, separating people from their family and moving them in as a bubble. But and the sizes of bubbles, because of course it was just about the time the rule of 6 came in as well. We were dealing with all of that challenge as well. So yeah, it's lots of logistics, and like everybody on this call who's experienced all year, you just get to the point where you can do something and then the rules change again, and then the rules change again, and then they change again. And all you can do is go with the rules you have on any one particular day.
And again, when you're short of cash as well to do these things, trying and work out in your crystal ball what the rules are going to be and how that's going to affect you must be really hard, but it's absolutely imperative.
It is, and that's exactly it. That was the other challenge of, there are some productions out there that are live streaming, but that was the challenge of the live stream. We didn't know what the rules would be on the day that we were live streaming. We didn't know what we would be facing, and it was that element of unknown that just was just a bit too scary.
And what about audience participation? Because pantomime is often and often the young kids really love it because they can participate, they can scream and shout out. So have you been able to simulate that, or is it a slightly different pantomime this year?
It's got to be slightly different for those productions that are trying to run live. And as you can appreciate, there were productions planned across the country by various different people. And then when you're thrown into tier 3, you suddenly can't run them. So there's been all sorts of challenges across the country for lots of production companies. But this year, if you do go into theatre, it's wearing face masks and it's no participation because you're not allowed to shout. For an online production, they've included as much as they can. There's lots of stuff to join in and lots of opportunity to join in. But there's also lots of chance to just watch and enjoy and just engage with a production as it is. Now, we are trying to run trying to run a live production of a show called Santa's Christmas Rescue, also at the Belgrade Theatre. It was due to open next Thursday. And then when they announced the tiers, Coventry had been expecting to be in tier 2, and we were announced as being in tier 3, which meant that we couldn't open the theatre. So we've got the production on hold. It's been rehearsed, and it's on hold, and we're hoping in the next round we get taken back to tier 2. And if we do, then we'll open on the 19th of December and run for 6 days and do a live show. But it's up in the air, as everything has been all year. Who knows? Will we get to perform? Won't we get to perform? We just don't know.
No. So looking forward to next year, when do you have to start your planning, and can you start that? Can you think that the Panto is now going to happen next year, bearing in mind the vaccine and then all the news we have about that, and hoping that most people will be vaccinated by the summer?
Yeah.
But it's still up in the air, even that, isn't it? Do we really know?
Well, it is. I mean, we were very, very fortunate as an organisation to have qualified to get some of the support from the government through the Culture Recovery Fund. And that Culture Recovery Fund commenced on the 2nd of November. And I had my team on furlough up until that point. And unfortunately, as well, sadly, we had to make many of our team redundant, which has been really hard because we're a successful, profitable business. How have we had to make people redundant? But our team that was 22 strong in January has returned to us as 11 strong in November. And the Cultural Recovery Fund is there to allow us to work. So we've been able to pick up the mantle of Panto 2021 already. So we're already working to prepare for Panto 2021. And that's an ongoing process. And it does take a good sort of 14 to 18 months to prepare for productions. But the difficulties this year is going to be whether we are going to have socially distanced audiences come December or not. And that's not something that we're going to know for a while. But in terms of budget, we have to make some major budgetary decisions, probably during March, April and early May. We have to make decisions on the scale of the show. How many cast members are we going to have? How many dancers? How many backstage crew? How many children? How many costumes? What kind of music? How many people in the band? All of those kind of decisions have to be made very early on so that we can write the script to fit the needs of the show. So we're going to have to run with 2 budgets, budget A and budget B. And budget A will be the show as we would normally run it at the scale that we would normally run it at. And budget B is going to have to be a pared down production that we would have to stage with a socially distanced audience to allow the finances to stack up. And I guess the biggest question for theatre is how soon we're going to know whether we will have full auditoriums or auditoriums at 50% or less. And that's going to be quite a challenge, because we're going to have to cast these shows, write these shows, prepare these shows. And do we write them to budget B, the smaller budget, and scale them up? Or do we write them to budget A and scale them down? Only time will tell. And once we know how successful the vaccine is, what the cases are, how it's going on in other countries, then that's at the point that we will know basically what the government will allow us to do.
Mm. I've got a question from the audience. Are there any long-term changes you'll make in the theatre, such as outdoor events or virtual events to stream to schools? Or do you hope to return to Panto as we all remember, and as quotes what the normal was a year ago?
Well, I think there's room for both now. I think that if we've learned anything over this last year, we've learned the opportunity that platforms such as Zoom and Teams present, and online streaming. We've all learned that it's okay to watch things from home. It's okay to meet without meeting face to face. And so I think that absolutely the backbone of theatre absolutely will remain as the live experience. It's what is unique about theatre, that live experience of a group of people that don't know each other coming together, experiencing something unique. Because let's face it, and Panto in particular, every single performance is completely different. The audience reacts in a different way. Something happens. There's always some kind of error or whatever it may be that makes it unique to that particular audience, whether the dame's wig falls off or someone slips in the slosh or whatever it may be. There's always something unique, and then you go your separate ways and you've experienced something unique together, and it's that togetherness which makes theatre so magical and so wonderful. But I also think that we now know that there is an opportunity to reach out further and wider. The Belgrade online production is a prime example of that, of how, I mean, we've already seen it because it's live and it's already happened. And my daughter happened to be one of the dancers in the show. We've already sat and watched it together at home and created a different panto memory this year by watching online production and still being a part of it. There are people who may be in hospital and be poorly. There's people who may have moved away from the area but still like to see their local panto. There may be people who, I've got a daughter of my own, and for many years, because my husband and I both work in theatre, it was very hard for one or the other, for both of us to go to theatre together. So one of us often missed out on the experience. Now with streaming, we'll be able to bring it into people's homes and you'll be able to watch it. So I actually think the answer to that question is that both will naturally sit together moving forwards, and streaming to schools and to old folks' homes and hospitals and all the platforms and the people who may struggle to get into theatre, I think it will naturally progress that way. We've always shied away from online and streaming because it's been a worry about it's stopping people going to a live experience. But actually, I think we've learned this year, nothing will ever stop you wanting to go live. Streaming will only enhance the opportunities that the theatre industry presents. And that can be museums as well, and galleries, and all sorts of other experiences along the same kind of lines.
Another question from the audience: what do you think of the ecosystem of the theatre at the moment? Is it going to survive? I mean, your business has been under such pressure and you've just about managed to cope and survive. What about the suppliers to your business and, wider than that?
What was a massive worry to us at the very start when the government announced their rescue package, 1.57 billion, there was a real worry that it wasn't going to be spread across the industry. There was a real concern that it might just go to venues rather than the companies in and around the business. But what did happen in the theatre industry, about 550 to 600 million of pounds of the money the grant money came to the theatre industry. So it has had a really good injection of cash. And it was reassuring to see that it spread quite wide across production companies and suppliers. One of the commitments that we as an organisation made to our grant was that we would make sure that our grant was passed down the line. So the money that we received, some of it would pay overheads and salaries here at head office, but that we would engage freelancers and suppliers and try and share the love, as it were. So that's a positive. I think there is a real danger, however, that there will be significant numbers of suppliers who will leave the industry. So one of the, I was explaining to Philippa when we caught up yesterday, when you go to the theatre and you buy a programme, the majority of those programmes are created by a company called John Good. John Good were based in Coventry and they've moved to Rugby, and they were specialists in theatrical programme creation. But sadly, the pandemic has taken them. So moving forwards, I think we will see a very significant change in the way that programs are delivered. I think we'll see them much more app-based, much more digital-based rather than a physical printout. So there will be a loss of suppliers, but I think what we will see is that people have been forced to think differently. So I think there's a mix of, yes, there will be sadly some loss. There will be some that return as the same as, but there will also be some people who have thought outside the box and bring something very, very different. And the industry will naturally progress and naturally move as a result of that. At least that's what I hope will happen anyway.
What have you found the hardest out of all this? I mean, there must be so much of it has been so hard. But what do you think, what have you learnt about yourself as a result of all what's happened, do you think?
I think the hardest thing has been losing people. Our team isn't just a team of colleagues, it's a team of friends. When you work in the theatre industry is a vocation. You don't work in the theatre industry to become wealthy, because it's not that kind of job. You do it because you love it, and it's part of your identity of who you are. And so we don't just work together, but we socialise together too. And our hobby is doing theatre, so we do it professionally for a career, but we all get our fix of performing by going off and doing amateur work as well, and just getting involved in all sorts of local theatre. So our team isn't just working, we're actually going out in the evenings together. and to have to ring and to have to speak to your friends and say, I'm going to have to make you redundant. I'm really sorry, but A, there isn't the work, and B, there isn't the money. And I have to protect the business. I have to put the business first. Was probably some of the toughest phone calls I've ever had to make. They were just utterly gracious in their understanding and acceptance of it. And they were the ones telling me it was okay, whereas I was the one falling apart and saying, I'm really sorry. And they were going, it's fine. We understand. We can see it. We get it. And so I think if I've learned anything, I've learned don't underestimate the power of friends, because they understand and they get it. Having to do things that I never thought I'd have to do proved to me that sometimes you have to take yourself out of who you are and just deal with and take the emotion out of things. I found that very hard. I'm a very emotional person, so taking myself out of that situation I found really hard this year. And coming back into the office and finding empty desks was just heartbreaking. So it sounds awful, but we've taken the desks away and rearranged the whole office, just because I don't want to go through that emotion every day of having, oh, Emma should be sitting there and Amy should be sitting there and they're not. And I don't want to go through that emotion every day, because it will absolutely eat me up. And it has eaten me up all year. But I also know that I'm by taking them away, it's the way that I can bring them back, and I actually protect them by giving them a chance to go off and find something else. And then the aim is to bring the whole team back together again. Once we've established and stabilized ourselves kind of in a year's time, I would welcome them all back in if they want to come. So that's been the hardest thing, I think.
And have you had some spare time in all this, or have you just been consumed by having to keep trying to find solutions, to find money and to find opportunities to work your way through this? Or have you been able to put some of that aside and actually have a bit of time for you and the family?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what we've all found this year, isn't it? That actually we've been at home more, so we've not had the commute, which has been a godsend for me personally, not having to commute. Simple things like my daughter was educated from home for the period of March through to July. Whilst that was awful, it did mean that every morning we could go for a family walk because we weren't rushing for the school run. And I personally play a lot of golf, so I've managed to play a lot more than I would ever normally play, which for me personally has been wonderful. And I said to you earlier, Philippa, didn't I? Someone said to me, don't let the opportunities that the pandemic presents pass you by. And opportunity will come in many shapes and forms. And opportunity for me has been time on a golf course. It's been time to do the garden and reflect, which I think we've all potentially had. And some people will see that as a personal challenge. For me, I've seen that as almost a mid-career break that I never thought I'd get. I always used to say, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a Christmas off? Just a Christmas off. Careful what you wish for.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
So do you think the government could have done more in terms of more support for the live event sector? A number of people who work in the events have said to one of the ladies in the audience that they felt they'd been ignored and badly let down. Is that your reflection, or do you think the government have done the best of a bad and difficult job really that they've had to do?
I think it's been an interesting one, hasn't it? Because in terms of a production company like us, actually, when you look at the help that we have had, we've been able to use furlough, we have had the cultural recovery grant, and we have had the council tax holiday. So all of those elements have helped us enormously. We're still facing a catastrophic financial loss on the season, well over £250,000 financial loss, if not significantly more. And that's the reality of the situation. But we run cash rich, and we know that we can get through as long as we don't take any risk. So from a live events, I can only speak from Imagine's perspective and the help that we have received, and we've been very lucky that we have received help. On the flip side of that, I know of a huge number of my colleagues who we work with as freelancers who've literally had no help at all. I'll give you an example of one of my members of staff who left us as a permanent member of staff on payroll and moved to being a freelancer about 18 months ago. And because the time she moved, she hadn't got enough proof of self-employment to qualify for the self-employment income support scheme. So she's gone for the entire year with absolutely no support. I haven't been able to furlough her because she wasn't on my payroll. I haven't been able to help her because she didn't qualify. So I think, I don't know whether the person on the call is thinking in that manner, but I think my comment would be the government has done a huge amount to help, but I think that there has been, sadly, an enormous number of people, particularly in the freelance entertainment and live events industry, who have absolutely fallen through the gaps and are literally in a catastrophic personal financial situation.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, and I can really resonate with this. How have you managed to get through this, and what advice would you to have for others that are on, and it seems like there's a number of people on this call that are in that boat, that have had really, really tough years. What advice do you have to how you get through this? Because you've had some very difficult times.
Oh God, it's been so tough. And I send a huge amount of love to anybody on the webinar who's having a hard time right now, because my God, none of us saw this coming, did we? You really, really didn't. How have I got through it? I've got through it by just taking a day at a time, I think, by looking at what I can do on that day and making a decision based on the information I have and never regretting it. So if you make it, I made a decision to make my staff redundant, and although it breaks my heart, I haven't regretted the decision, because the day I made the decision, it was the right decision to make. I didn't know what was down the line. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know the Cultural Recovery Fund was going to give us a payment. I didn't know any of that. And so for me personally, it was just trusting my instincts and trusting myself and going with what I felt was right. It's not always been right, trust me, believe me. I'm not perfect. I have made mistakes this year like everybody else. All I've tried to do is be honest to myself and to be honest to what I think is the right thing to do, and to put the business first. And that's been hard, because I always have put people first, but to protect the business so that in the long term we have a business that we can create work and we can get people back into work as quickly as possible. That's been my personal thing. And then the other thing for me has just been, as I say, spending time with my husband and my daughter and getting on the golf course and getting away from it. It's been my lifeline this year. At one point in the year, I felt like I was 18 again, as I looked at the log of where I'd driven in my car. And I'd driven to work once to check on the unit, to run the taps and to make sure that everything was okay. And I'd driven to the golf course 5 times. Never had that opportunity before. I haven't had that since I was a teenager. So yeah, I've just trusted myself and been determined. And there's been highs and there's been some massive lows. Yeah, I don't know if that helps anybody. That's just how I got through it anyway.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Just one final question, really around going forward. Are there things that you're going to do in your life differently now, having been through this experience, be it giving yourself a bit more personal time, or in the way that you work and operate? Are there things that you will keep from this pandemic that will make lasting changes, do you think?
Yeah, and when you work for yourself or you are self-employed, it's very easy to think that you're the only person that can do it. And I'm totally guilty of that. I'm totally guilty. I'm the right person to do this, and I just need to get on with it and do it. And then during Christmas panto season, I end up working 90-hour weeks, and it's for 10 weeks on end, and I don't get any sleep and I don't rest. And actually, I think what I've learned from all of this is it's okay to let go. It's okay to trust other people with it. It's okay for them to run with stuff, and you don't always have to be in control. Because the minute we came back to work, I had 9 people, myself and my husband just 2, and then the other 9 chomping at the bit to take on responsibility and do things. And the minute you hand it over to them, they do get on with it, and they do it really, really well. So I'm hoping that that's what I take away from it, that actually we've got an amazing, incredible team of wonderful people, and I want to make sure that I give them more opportunities.
Well, thank you, Sarah. That, I think, has been a really fascinating session to be able to chat to you about your experiences, are far beyond anything that I've ever known this year. We've all had different challenges to face, but I think you've had some of the toughest challenges, and also not knowing what was going to happen in front of you, because you can't really plan when the goalposts keep moving. And I know we've all been a little bit like that, with none of us really knowing what's going on. But in theatre and live events in particular, it's been so hard. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. You're a true inspiration. And I'm so grateful for you for coming along and just sharing your experiences and being so open and frank and honest about it. So thank you.
And if anybody wants to chat in any way, please tell Dima or Philippa and let me know. And if you just want to have an email chat or anything, if anybody's just wants to have someone to chat to, please, I'm absolutely totally open to just having a virtual coffee if anybody fancies it.
Thank you. And I hope everybody enjoys the panto. I'm sure I will. I'm looking forward to watching it myself, because I do like a bit of panto. So it's good that it's actually going to happen anyway, even if it's in a slightly different way. At least we get to have a panto fix. So thank you.
Yeah, a bit of Christmas, a bit of family memories together. Just create a different memory this year with your family and your friends. Can't physically go to the panto, watch it in your lounge. Yeah. It's just different.
Thank you very much. It's been fantastic talking to you. And I've got quite a few people have just messaged to say how inspiring you are. So they show my video, so that's lovely. And thanks everybody for coming today. I hope you have a great Christmas and make some magical memories too.
Happy Christmas, everybody.
Bye.